Now, from Wish TV, your local news source, this is All Indiana Politics.
Good morning and welcome to All Indiana Politics. I'm Garrett Bergquist in for Phil Sanchez. The budget bill containing many of President Donald Trump's proposals could be headed for a rewrite. The bill stalled after it failed to pass out of the House Budget Committee on Friday. The current plan makes the 2017 tax cuts permanent. It also requires Medicaid users to have at least 80 hours per month of work, education, or community service. That's if they're able-bodied adults without dependents. It also funds border wall construction and hiring more customs officers and border patrol agents. And it would exempt tips and overtime pay from federal income tax. I talked to Congressman Rudy Yakam, who serves on the House Ways and Means Committee, before Friday's vote. Let's bring in Congressman Rudy Yakam. Congressman, welcome back to the show.
Great to be on today. Thanks.
So the House Ways and Means Committee voted to eliminate taxes on overtime and tips. Tell me about the rationale behind that.
Yeah, well, these are priorities that President Trump ran on, and that these are priorities that we wanted to deliver not only for the president, but for working people in this country. You know, back in Indiana's 2nd District, people want to be able to get up, go to work, and be able to do so in a way that leaves more money in their pockets. And the bill that we passed out of the Ways and Means Committee leaves more money in Hoosier pockets.
What exceptions and rules would filers need to know about for this if that language passes in its current form?
Well, there'll be some level of higher level income caps. But for the most part, you'll be able to take a deduction for tips and for things like working overtime. So we want to encourage people to get up and go to work every day and to do so with more money in their pockets. I mean, that's really the point of not only those two provisions, but many, many other provisions that we've included in this tax package.
There's a provision to allow some businesses to expense all qualifying business property. How would that work, and what's the rationale behind that one?
This is a Made in America provision. We want to encourage companies to build new factories here in this country and hire manufacturing workers. One of the components of that is to allow companies who are building new factories here to fully expense or depreciate those new buildings on day one. Normally what has to happen is a company will build a building and they'll have to depreciate that over the course of 40 years sometimes. Instead of 40 years, they'll be able to write it off in the first year. That should help us create a manufacturing boom in this country over the course of the next 4 years. That's why we did it.
Now, the Energy and Commerce Committee voted to impose work requirements on Medicaid users. Now, you are not a member of that committee. Some Republicans in both chambers already say they will not support the bill if that provision stays in. Will you vote for the bill in its current form if that Medicaid work requirement stays in?
I absolutely support work requirements for Medicaid. If you're an able-bodied adult that's able to go to work, the federal government should not be paying for Medicaid for you not to go to work. You should have to go out and look for a job. This shouldn't be controversial. It's just common sense.
Are the potential savings worth the potential impact to some Medicaid users? And could this potentially end up leading to more expenses on the back end from people using emergency rooms?
You know, Medicaid work requirements alone are projected to save over $300 billion in this program. At the end of the day, we all know that the federal government is quite bloated and needs to be right-sized. We've got $37 trillion in federal debt. We've got to start right-sizing our federal government. That's what the American people voted for, and that's why we're making a lot of these reforms.
The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget estimates that the current spending proposal could lead to $3 trillion in deficits each year. Is it wise to extend tax cuts if we're looking at those numbers?
The real question that we have to answer here is, does the federal government tax too much or do we spend too much? My belief is that the American people pay enough money in taxes. The federal government needs to reform the amount of money that we spend. We need to save money from the federal government. This federal package here, this tax package, will reform and cut over $1.5 trillion from the federal budget over the course of the next 10 years in terms of our overall spending. I think that's a great deal for the American people.
I also want to ask about a letter that you signed on to the chair of the FCC, calling on the FCC to eliminate ownership caps for TV stations. Why did you sign on to that? And is there a risk that that could lead to fewer TV stations in smaller markets due to consolidation?
What we called on them to do is to update their rules. The rules in the FCC, which by law are required to be updated, have not been updated. And it's been quite some time, a number of decades, since these rules have been updated. There's a lot that's changed in media, even over the course of the last 10 years. All we're asking the FCC to do is to update their rules and to bring them into the modern era.
Is that worth the potential cost, though, to newsrooms in smaller markets such as yours?
Well, I think anytime we're looking at modernizing rules, I think that's a good thing. There are so many things in our federal government that we haven't touched or reviewed in decades. I think that's a disservice to the American people. And by bringing these rules up to the modern digital age, I just think it makes sense.
Congressman Rudy Yakam, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Meanwhile, an air traffic controller shortage and faulty equipment led to multiple incidents in which controllers at Newark Liberty International Airport could not see incoming planes. That came just days after the Trump administration announced a major overhaul of the nation's air traffic control system. Congressman André Carson serves on the House Aviation Subcommittee. I caught up with him just after he got out of a hearing on the matter. Let's bring in Congressman André Carson. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
What an honor. Thank you.
So what have the FAA and the DOT told you about the air traffic controller situation at Newark Airport and across the country? You serve on the Aviation Subcommittee.
Yeah, well, I want to be clear. America's skies have always been the safest in the world. Until this year, this administration really ignored directives Congress passed in the FAA Reauthorization Act last year to quickly staff up, to hire more personnel, and to really replace outdated equipment and technology. The Trump administration has fired hundreds of critical aviation workers and made the already challenging job of air traffic control that much more difficult. And they've also added pressure and threats of job loss to aviation safety professionals.
Should the people that you say were fired be reinstated?
I think so, especially those who've been fired clearly without cause. I mean, we've seen more crashes this year than I've seen since serving on the Aviation Subcommittee. We've seen near misses, aborted landings and takeoffs, and other human-made problems that could have been prevented, quite frankly. At our FAA hearing this morning, we learned that part of the issue in New Jersey was effectively a breakdown of the communication systems that the air traffic controllers rely on, and a stopgap move to transfer operations from one tower to a different tower, which really exacerbated the problem.
Is this more a personnel issue or an equipment issue?
Well, quite frankly, in all transparency, there are some equipment issues. I mean, a lot of the equipment is dated, quite frankly. I think folks are understaffed. And just in Newark, a few days ago, as you know, there were only 3 air traffic controllers operating the system in one of the busiest airports in the world. We need a full investigation and accounting of what happened to really get the entire picture. But we know that we need to modernize technology. That's obviously clear. And we have to hire more air traffic controllers, which Congress mandated last year. And, my friends on the other side of the aisle continue to delay critical funding for aviation safety. It's unacceptable.
How representative is the situation at Newark Airport of the situation nationwide, particularly at airports here in the Midwest?
Well, I like to say that we have the best airport in the country, voted #1 11 years in a row. Mario and the team out there are doing a fantastic job. But, I'm always concerned, especially as it relates to the Midwest. We're the crossroads of America. You can get to many parts of the country in under 12 hours, if not all parts of the country in under 12 hours, coming from this central region, especially Indianapolis. But I am concerned about other airports. I'm concerned about regional airports, always in updating our equipment to meet the needs. And I don't want this to become an opportunity for our adversaries to see this as a weak point, to make a political point or a terrorist point.
What do you make of Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy's proposal to expand, to provide new investments such as new air traffic control radars, new air traffic control centers, that sort of thing?
I think those investments are overdue. It's something that we attempted last year. I agree with Secretary Duffy's instincts, but I'm more concerned about President Trump and Republicans not demonstrating the kind of leadership. I would hope that they would drop their dangerous policies and work with us in a very bipartisan way to keep Americans safe. We all want the same things at the end of the day, whether you're Republican, Democrat, or independent. Our methodologies vary, but we cannot use political pageantry to get these things done. And as a member of the Aviation Committee, we're all monitoring developments and will investigate all the details and the facts as they emerge.
How do we fix the personnel shortage?
Well, I think we want to correct the mistakes that have been made, get folks back to work, make sure that this doesn't happen again. I think the attacks on federal workers and public servants, they have to stop. We can't continue to make political points while we're hurting the hiring and retention of air traffic controllers.
Congressman André Carson, thank you for joining us.
What an honor. Thank you.
Coming up, a new state law extends the statute of limitations for rape, but only under certain conditions. Rape survivors will soon get more time to ask prosecutors to file charges, but only if new evidence emerges. Survivors and advocates tell me it's a start, but it's not nearly enough. Carissa Seatman plans to give this shirt to one of the state senators who helped push the bill through as a thank you.
It's been really encouraging. I felt like for the first time our voices were being heard.
Seatman was sexually assaulted more than 20 years ago. Her initial efforts to get prosecutors to bring charges went nowhere, and the statute of limitations has kept her from reopening the case. Under current law, if the 5-year statute of limitations runs out, prosecutors get another 5 years if new DNA or video evidence emerges or if someone confesses. Seatman was among those who lobbied lawmakers this session to change that. A new law passed this spring doubled it to 10 years under that scenario. Seatman says that would not have helped her.
It was something that came to us that it might not make it through the House Criminal Committee with the statutes completely lifted. So that was a hard decision that we, decided to make, is that we were going to take the win.
Every survivor's journey is different. And many, many survivors will wait years, even decades. We know that survivors of child sex abuse in particular come forward an average of 20 or more years, really.
Illinois and Kentucky have no statute of limitations for rape. Ohio has a 20-year time limit. The Senate's version would have repealed the statute of limitations entirely for rape and for child molesting. The House scaled it back.
And at that point where we were in session, I mean, you kind of got to take what you can get. My preference is to eliminate the statute of limitations on level 3 rape and child molest.
White says advocates will continue to push for a longer statute of limitations. She says repealing it altogether is still ideal, but a 20 or 25-year limit would be a good compromise. Seatman says the new law is a good start.
I've just been grateful for the process. I've been grateful for every legislator, every media outlet, everyone that's shed light on this and have helped us get to the finish line. It's taken everybody.
Coming up, Indiana's best political team assesses what the Republican spending plan in Washington means for you. And welcome back to All Indiana Politics as we welcome in two members of Indiana's best political team, Democrat Lara Beck and Republican Mario Massillamany. Welcome to you both. Let's talk about the Republican spending plan in Congress. Some conservative Republicans want steeper Medicaid cuts. Mario, how big of a setback was Friday's Budget Committee vote?
I don't think it was that big of a setback, Garrett. I think that, this bill is a massive bill, as Trump talks about this being the big, beautiful bill. So there's so many different things involved in this bill. They need to make sure that the cuts that they are requesting, both in Medicare, Medicaid, and then also some of the cuts as it pertains to some of the other issues, don't disrupt or bust the budget and the deficit. So I think that there's going to be some horse trading to figure out what the numbers are to make sure that this gets done and accomplished by, I believe Trump wants to sign this bill by July 4th. Do I think that's aggressive? I think so, especially with the House wanting to try and pass this out of the House by Memorial Day weekend. So I don't think that this bill is dead on arrival. I think there's going to be some more horse trading, trying to get some of the more conservative members on board with some of the other members to make sure that everyone gets something that they want out of this bill.
Lara, let's talk about the balancing act here. How likely is it that the division between the party's moderate and conservative wing gets resolved anytime soon, given the narrow margin in the House?
Well, I think that's a really good question. And I also think that, as Mario said, there's going to be a lot of horse trading that's going to take place. But I think what we have to remember is with every passing day, we are one day closer to the midterms. And you've got folks who, especially on the Republican side, and same with Democrats, but you've got some Republicans who they won in blue districts, right? And this is going to have a major impact across the country, particularly because of the taking, essentially taking from the poor and giving to the rich. And I think that is what's really going to have an impact. The other part is that the bill as it stands right now adds something like $3 trillion or more than $3 trillion to the deficit. And there are many, many conservatives out there who do not want to add to the deficit. And you are balancing this budget on the backs of our kids and our grandkids and their kids. So that's something I think that you're going to see a lot of people arguing about and really working on in the horse trading, because you're also getting so close to the midterms and timing has a big element up there.
Let's talk about a couple of the provisions in the bill. Mario, Republicans said they would not cut Medicaid, and now they're calling for Medicaid work requirements. Did they break that promise?
I don't believe so. I think the main focus for Republicans is to make sure that Medicaid is sustained and is strengthened. So, one of the things is Medicaid, as it currently stands, there's so much fraud involved in this that, the goal I think that Republicans and Democrats want to do when Medicaid was originally created, it was to make sure that expecting mothers, children, people with disabilities were taken care of, and also the elderly. And so I think that they're trying to focus on making sure that Medicaid is sustainable long term, because it's one of the most expensive and biggest agencies in our federal government. And so if we do not figure out ways to make it more efficient, effective, and sustainable, then a lot of people are going to be hurting. And so this work requirement, I don't believe that this is something that Republicans are breaking their promise on. All they're doing is trying to make sure that Medicaid is long-lasting and is sustainable for the people that truly do need it.
Lara, how heavy a lift is 80 hours per month? This would be able-bodied adults without dependents.
Well, I think let's go back to a little bit more of the devil in the details on this, and let's also go back to a little bit of the fraud piece. I mean, we hear all about there's so much fraud with Medicaid and there's so much fraud and abuse. We have a president who is accepting a $400 million Air Force One jet from Qatar, and the Qataris have some major issues with how they run their operations and who they fund. So before we start talking about people who are poor, who might have disabilities, who might have a whole host of other issues, I think we need to be focusing our efforts on fraud and abuse in other areas. When you talk about Medicaid and cutting Medicaid, right now the way the number looks is it's 8 million people. And these are people who might be caring for somebody who has a disability. They might be someone who has a long-term disability. And so I think when you start putting that in and making these blanket statements about how people don't want to work and all of that, I think that's disingenuous, and I don't think it's right. I think the other part about this bill too is this bill also takes $300 million from SNAP and food assistance programs, and so kids will get mostly kids who are on this program, they'll get about $6 a day to eat, while the billionaires are going to get $300 million put toward their tax cuts. So I really think it's a question of priorities. I think once people start really looking into it and seeing it, I think they're going to have major issues with it, because a lot of people are on Medicaid.
Lara, I've got about 25 or so seconds left here. Do you need to move on to one last thing here on a much lighter note? This is our last show for the Indianapolis 500. Who's going to drink the milk next weekend? Lara?
My neighbor, who is a huge race fan, said Pato O'Ward, and so that's what I'm going with.
How about you, Mario?
I believe Scott Dixon is a dark horse. He's a previous winner. He's just a great guy. I've met him before. I hope he has a chance to drink that milk. So good luck, Scott.
All right. Well, we will see you next Sunday. Thank you so much. We'll be right back. Thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics. Please join us next Sunday morning for our special live coverage leading up to the Indianapolis 500. All Indiana Politics will return on Sunday, June 1st at 9:30. Have a great rest of your weekend.